Desde Obreal les damos la más cordial bienvenida a este
On behalf of
webinar
L'Oreal, we welcome you
denominado
all
El
to
rol
this
de la mujer
webinar, The
en la
Role of
ciencia y el
Women in
desarrollo.
Science and Development. This is the
Este
title of the
webinar
webinar.
está
This webinar is
organizado
organized
por el
by
International
the
Science Council
International
de
Science
Ciencias,
Council, Minister of
IDRC
Science,
Canadá y
Science
Obreal.
IDC of Canada, and L'Oreal.
Este es uno de los eventos
It is one of the
preparatorios del
preparatory
tercer
events
diálogo
of the
interregional
third
sobre
interregional
educación
dialogue about
y desarrollo
education and
entre América
development
Latina,
between
el
Latin
Caribe,
America, the
África y
Caribbean,
Europa.
Africa, and Europe.
Desde el año
And
2022,
since
estos diálogos
2022, these
interregionales en
interregional
educación y
dialogues
desarrollo
in
se
education
han
and development
consolidado como una
have
plataforma clave
consolidated as
para
a key
fortalecer los
platform
vínculos
to
entre la
reinforce the
CELAC
links
y la
between
Unión Africana,
CELAC and the African Union.
y ha buscado promover
And it
alianzas
wants to
estratégicas
boost
entre gobiernos y
strategic alliances
universidades,
between
pero
universities and
involucrando
governments,
también al sector
engaging
privado
also the private
y
sector,
profundizando la
and also
comprensión que podríamos
strengthening
decir entre
our
pueblos a partir
understanding
del
between different
reconocimiento
peoples
de
by
historias,
recognizing
desafíos y valores
stories,
compartidos.
challenges, and the shared
A partir
values.
de las
And
conclusiones del pasado
from the
diálogo en
conclusions
segundo
of the
diálogo
last
de
dialogue, the
desarrollo
second
regional
one
en
that
Etiopía,
took place in
las
Ethiopia,
instituciones organizadoras
the
pusieron en marcha una
organizers
hoja de ruta
started a roadmap,
colaborativa
a
para
collaborative
construir
roadmap to
colectivamente la
build in a
agenda
collective
del
way
tercer
the
diálogo que se
agenda
realiza
of
en
the third
Bogotá.
dialogue that is taking
Y
place
esta
in
hoja de ruta
Bogota.
incluye
This road
talleres,
map
actividades
includes
preparatorias
activities,
abiertas,
preparatory activities,
participación en
uh,
espacios políticos
participation
regionales
in
como las
regional
organizaciones
political spaces,
multilaterales de educación.
multilateral
Y
spaces,
todo esto lo que
and
busca es que la
this
agenda del tercer
wants
diálogo
the
refleje
agenda
las
of the third
prioridades
dialogue to
verdaderas,
reflect the
las
real
prioridades
priorities,
políticas
the
de las
political
regiones
priorities of
participantes.
the regions that
La
participate.
tercera edición de este
The third
diálogo,
edition of this
que está
dialogue,
coorganizada por el
that is
gobierno de
co-organized
Colombia
by
en su
the
calidad
government
de
of
presidencia
Colombia
temporal
as
de la CELAC,
a
también
temporary
por la Unión Africana,
presidency by
por
the
Obreal,
African
por la
Union, by
Asociación de
Obreal and the
Universidades, por la
Colombian
Asociación de Universidades
Association
de
of
África,
Universities and of
busca
Africa,
avanzar
wants to
sobre los
move
logros
forward
alcanzados
and
en
piggybacking
estas
on
ediciones
what we
anteriores
learned from the past,
y también busca
and
impulsar
also
iniciativas
boosting
conjuntas en
joint
educación y desarrollo
initiatives in
sostenible
education and
que sean
sustainable
capaces de ofrecer
development that
respuestas
can
comunes a
give an answer,
desafíos que
common
tenemos
answers
compartidos
to
entre
shared
África,
challenges that we have
Caribe y
between Latin
Europa.
America, Caribbean, Europe, and
Este tercer
Africa.
diálogo
And this
interregional, quiero
third
decirles y
interregional
confirmarles que se
dialogue, I want to
celebrará
tell you that is going
en
to take
Bogotá,
place in
Colombia,
Bogota, in
entre el
Colombia,
3 y el
between the
7
3rd
y el 7 de
and the
noviembre de
7th of
2025,
November
es decir, este próximo
2025.
mes de noviembre.
So this
Aquellos que
year,
estén
in a
interesados en
few months, if
temas
you are
sobre
interested
estos
in having
diálogos,
more
sobre
information about these
cómo
dialogues and
registrarse, cómo inscribirse,
how
pueden
to
ingresar a la página
register, please go to
obreal.org para
obreal.org
obtener más
and you will
información
obtain
detallada.
more information about the
Este
registering
webinar de
process.
hoy, que es el rol de
Today's
la mujer en
webinar,
la
The
ciencia y el
Role
desarrollo,
of
está
Women in
diseñado
Science
para
in
fomentar este
Development,
diálogo
wants to
interregional
boost this
significativo a través de
interregional
presentaciones, estudios
dialogue
de casos,
through
panel
different
interactivo,
interactive channels and
queremos
case
avanzar en esa
studies. We want
identificación de
to
oportunidades
move
para una
forward and
acción conjunta
identify
en África, América
opportunities
Latina.
in this
Vamos a
joint
tener
action.
primero
We are going to have,
dos
first of all, two
intervenciones
interventions,
de 5 minutos cada una,
5 minutes each.
de primero de nuestra institución
And
IDRC, luego de
with
Ciencia de
IDIC
Colombia.
and
Posteriormente le daremos
the
paso
International Development Research
al tema
Center,
de
and
fondo
then
de este
we are going
diálogo
to
con
start
nuestras
talking
invitadas de primer
with
nivel
our
de distintos
first level
continentes. Y al finalizar
guests from different continents, and
este
then
diálogo,
when we
podremos
finish
tener
the
un corto
dialogue, we will
espacio de
open
preguntas
a
para
short Q&A
explorar las
session
conclusiones
and we will
y
give
culminares de
some
este seminario.
conclusions and then we will
Esperamos que
finish
sea algo
this
corto, ágil
webinar. We
y que nos
expect it to
aporte
be
en esta
nimble
ruta
and fast
que
and
nos
that can
llevará a este tercer diálogo.
contribute to this
Como primer
roadmap
invitado le daré la
towards this
palabra
third
a
dialogue. I'm
Fernando
going to give the
Pierini,
floor to
que es
Fernando
jefe de
Pierini,
Grupo de
first of
Educación y
all,
Ciencia del Centro Internacional
director
de la
of
Ciencia para el
the
Desarrollo,
International
IDRC
Development
Canadá,
Research
para
Center
un
in
saludito y
Canada.
que nos compartan
And
por qué
he is
este
going
tema
to
es
share
importante
why
para
this
el
topic is
IDRC.
so
Fernando,
important for the
bienvenido. Muchas gracias.
IDRC. Fernando, whenever you
Muchas
want.
gracias, Juan.
Thank you very
Good
much,
morning
Juan.
from Ottawa, and good afternoon, evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. Yes, I'm Fernanda Perini, team leader of Education Science here for Canada's International Development Research Center, IDRC. And it is really a privilege to be part of today's dialogue on the role of women in science and development. A conversation that could not be more timely and more essential as gender equality is under threat, under attack in many places in the world. Let me first thank our co-hosts, Obrel, ISC, and Minister Isenia Olaya from Colombia, and allow me to acknowledge that IDRC's headquarters is located in unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. For IDRC, gender equality is not only a moral imperative, it's fundamental for scientific excellence, social justice, and sustainable development. Today, women make up only 30% of global research workforce and fewer than 20% in fields like engineering, physics, and agriculture. Uh, in many countries in Latin America and Africa, this is very true. The gender gap is not due to the lack of interest or capacity, it's rooted in deep systemic barriers. There are cultural norms, lack of mentorship, invisible care burdens, lack of policies that support equity. These structural issues rob us from talent, rob us from, and rob science from its potential. At our, and at IDRC, we believe that research can change that. To address these challenges, IDRC launched back a few years ago the Breaking Barriers Network, a sulfur-led initiative involving over 15 projects across Africa and Latin America, which met, all these partners met last time in Addis at the Interregional Dialogue there to compile lessons learned from their research on this issue. I will put on the chat a link to the synthesis report, which was produced as a result of our workshop, just a side event to the event in Addis last year. Also, let me share a few examples of some of these projects. For instance, in Zimbabwe, a project is working with the Minister of Higher Education to develop policies on sexual harassment and gender equity. They introduced gender audits in universities and established a gender diversity and center and a STEM hub for women. And that has significantly increased enrollment and retention of female students. In Colombia, a project worked with TVET platforms to promote green jobs among rural women. This included hand-on training in sustainable production and the creation of 15 women-led rural units, becoming both economic engine and training centers. In Mexico, a program awarded postdoctoral fellowships to indigenous women scientists, a historical first in the region, actually. This not only boosted their visibility and careers, but directly challenged stereotypes that have excluded them from the research systems. So across these examples, we see the power of an intersectional, evidence-based strategy. Those that address not just the gender, but also indigeneity, geography, and socioeconomic status. We also see a common threat. Change comes when data, mentorship, and institutional reforms come together. So IDRC is proud to support this work on breaking barriers, but we also know that no single organization can achieve gender equality in science alone. And that's the opportunity of this interregional dialogue. We are already working with UNESCO and other organizations, such as the Organization of Women in Science in Developing Countries, to explore how we can advance together and close the gender gap in science. Also, we look forward to November dialogue, where we are looking forward to work together with governments in Africa and Asia and Latin America to scale what works in terms of supporting women in science, fund more sulfur-led research, and make gender equality a core pillar of science systems, not as a peripheral concern. I'm looking forward to hear from the panelists today in this webinar and explore the opportunities in the exchange with you all. Thank you very much.
Fernando, muchísimas gracias. Ahora
Thank you
escucharemos
very
a la
much,
directora
Fernando. Now we're
de
going to
Capacidades y
hear the
Apropiación del
Director of
Conocimiento del
Capabilities
Ministerio
and
de
Knowledge
Ciencia y
of the
Tecnología,
Ministry of
Laura
Science
Vanessa Melo,
in Colombia, Angela Vanessa Melo,
nos puede dar un marco
and she is
estratégico
going to
de
give
lo que
us
puede venir la
a
mujer en la ciencia, el
framework
desarrollo.
of the role of women in science and in development.
Bienvenida.
Whenever you want,
Bueno,
Dr.
muy
Angela
buenos
Melo.
días.
Well,
Muchísimas
good morning
gracias.
and thank you very much.
Estimados, estimadas colegas en la Universidad
Dear
Federal de
colleagues
Rio
of
Grande do
the
Brasil,
Federal University
el
of Rio
Centro
Grande in
Científico de la
Brazil,
Academia
the
Polaca de Ciencias,
Scientific
el
Center,
Centro
the
Especialista
Polish
de Desarrollo
Center,
Internacional de
the
Canadá, de la Red de Academias Africanas de
IDRC, the
Ciencia,
African
el
Network
Consejo
of
Internacional de
Academies, the
Ciencias
International
América
Council of
Latina y
Sciences
el
for Latin
Caribe,
America and the Caribbean,
AUBREAI.
OBREAL.
Reciban todos un cordial y caluroso
So,
saludo desde el Ministerio
greetings
de
from the
Ciencia,
Ministry
Tecnología e
of Science
Innovación de
and
Colombia.
Technology and Innovation in
Reciban
Colombia.
igualmente un
And
saludo de
also
parte de nuestra
greetings
señora
on
ministra,
behalf of the Minister,
especialista
Angela de
en los
Señolaya.
motivos de
She
agenda
has a
durante
very
los
busy
próximos días,
agenda
los días que
and
vienen,
she
para
would have
participar en
loved
este
to be
webinario, pero
here,
lamentablemente
but
no lo puede asistir, pero
unfortunately she
esperamos que
cannot be
podamos
here. But
encontrarnos
we
pronto
will
precisamente en
meet
Bogotá
very
en
soon
el
in
desarrollo del
Bogota
tercer diálogo
in this
internacional de
third
educación y
interregional
ciencia para América
dialogue
Latina y Caribe,
of
donde haremos
development and
entonces
education
un
for Latin
gusto
America. This is
poder
why
servir
it is a
ahorita para
pleasure
este
to keep on
ejercicio
moving
de conversación articulada
and
alrededor de
this
temas
articulated conversation
estratégicos
about our
que
strategic
constituyen
topics
desafíos,
about the
retos para nuestras
challenges and
regiones
the
y para el
threats for
mundo,
our
que
regions and for the world,
claramente también
and
está dentro del marco
that
estratégico y
is also in
prioritario de
the
nuestro Plan
priority
Nacional de
strategic
Desarrollo y
framework
nuestro
of the
Gobierno
development
Nacional
plan of the
y
national
por lo tanto
government,
también desde el
and
Ministerio
also
Gobierno, desde el
from
Ciencias,
the ministry, the Ministry of
reconocemos,
Sciences. We
reconocemos el
acknowledge
compromiso
the
con las
historical
mujeres
debt
en la
with women
ciencia y
in
estamos
science,
trabajando para
and we are
cerrar
working
esas
on
brechas
it to
estructurales,
close
¿cierto?, que
these
limitan su participación.
gaps that limit
Por
their
esa razón es
participation. And
que
this is
desde
why,
este
let me tell you
espacio y
that
desde esta
with this
intención de
idea
poder
and this
articular una
intention,
política de
in order
ciencia,
to
tecnología e
leverage
innovación
this
en un
innovation
enfoque
and
largo
science
de género
policy
y
that is
foco a largo
focused
plazo,
on gender
hemos
equality in
venido
the
también
long run,
trabajando en
we've
distintos
been working
programas que
in
buscan
different
precisamente
programs that
fortalecer el
want
rol
to
de las
reinforce
mujeres
the role of
científicas,
women in
y es que
science.
por primera
And
vez
for the
en la
first
historia de la
time
carrera
in
de
the
ciencia, tecnología e
history
innovación,
of the
hemos logrado superar la
department that
paridad.
we
Hemos
have
diseñado programas
overcome
como
the
el
parity. We
programa
have developed some
Orquídeas,
project like the
el cual
project
tenemos
Orquídeas,
entre el
Orchids,
2022 y el
and
2025.
between
En la edición
2020 to
2024 estamos
2025,
incrementando el
we won
67.3% de las
67%
asignaturas
of
doctorales. Esto hablando
the
de educación de alto
postdoctoral
nivel que estarán ocupadas por
fellowships are going to be
por mujeres,
occupied by
precisamente con
women.
vinculación muy estrecha
And
también con el Sistema
also
Nacional de Ciencia, Tecnología e
linking with
Innovación.
the
Esto es
national system
un
of
salto
innovation. This has
cualitativo,
been
pero
a
también
very
muy
important
importante considerando un
leap,
incremento de 20 puntos
taking
en
into account
comparación al
this
cuadrienio
increase of
anterior,
20 points if we compare it
2018-2020,
to the
donde
previous
claramente
period,
se
to
ve una decisión
2029.
concreta de gobierno que precisamente ha tenido
2022,
que ver con
and it
estar
is
pensando
related
una proyección también a
on
largo plazo
thinking
en poder
about
canalizar
this short,
recursos
this
desde el
long
gobierno para poder
perspective,
seguir
using the resources
respaldando
of
la
the
creación
government
de
in
empleo
order
y
to
la
boost
inserción
the
laboral.
training and the
Este programa
integration in the labor
Orquídeas
market of
es muy
women. This
importante,
program,
como
Orquídeas,
decíamos,
Orchids, is
es
very
una
important for the
estrategia de
ministry,
convergencia que
and it
articula la
is a
generación de
strategy that
primer y
articulates
también
the high level
complementa
training but
profesiones
also
científicas,
boosts
¿cierto?
scientific
Científicas, pero sobre todo
professions
principalmente
in
en jóvenes
girls
investigadoras,
and in
fomenta la
young
inserción
women,
laboral y el
boosting
tratamiento
the
propenso
integration
más
into the labor
especializado
market
para
so
ir a
that
áreas
more women
claves
can
precisamente
participate
para
in
el
these
país.
key areas that
Entre
are
el
very important for the
2023 y
country. Between
2024 hemos
2023 to
financiado
2024,
a
we
más
have
de
funded
170 mujeres
470
científicas y
scientists
este
women,
año,
and
en el
this
2025,
year,
proyectamos que esta
2025,
convocatoria que estamos
this
abriendo, que es prácticamente la tercera
bid that
etapa
we
de la
are
convocatoria
opening
vinculada al programa Orquídeas,
linked to this
pueda
Orchids
apoyar
program
a más
will
de
give
300
support to more
mujeres
than
con una inversión
300 women with an
superior a
investment
los 35
of
mil
more
millones
than
de pesos.
35
En este
million of
2025,
pesos.
precisamente
And
intentando
also
coordinar
trying
el
to
trabajo
boost
investigativo de las
the
mujeres
research
en áreas
of
específicamente
women
eficaz
in this
y
strategic
vanguardia para el
fields
país, ¿cierto? En
that are very
2025
important for the
lanzamos una edición
country. So
especial
we launched
que
a special
precisamente hemos
edition.
denominado Orquídeas,
We call
Mujeres
it
en Inteligencia
Orchids,
Artificial,
Women in
porque
Artificial
es
Intelligence,
cuántica,
Science and
sectores
Quantum
donde consideramos
Technology.
que la
These
brecha de género
sectors,
aún es más
uh,
profunda
we see that
y
the
queremos
gender gap
precisamente
is
que en
even
estas
bigger, and
áreas de
in
gran
these specific
importancia
areas,
las mujeres
we
estén
want to women
presentes
to be
y que puedan
present
liderar
so that
precisamente el
they can
futuro
lead the
científico y
future, the
tecnológico
scientific and
para Colombia.
technological future of
El
Colombia.
desarrollo de las
And the development of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence opens up new opportunities, but also ethical and social challenges. So we've been making a lot of effort from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Technology, and the Ministry of Science. And we were presenting the project to the Congress for the ethical regulation of artificial intelligence. We know that in Colombia, out of the 1,700 researchers in artificial intelligence, only 20% are women. And this shows a problem, and this is a structural problem vis-a-vis the gaps towards the participation of women in science. So from the Ministry of Sciences, we want to promote this in this conversation, and also to promote this advocacy, this artificial intelligence that has as foundations the human rights. And we've been leading the construction of this roadmap for Colombia that will be a tool that will guide the decisions of the government. And this roadmap that we are building includes as our priority the inclusion of women and girls in the policies and also the technological solutions based on artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is giving us a lot of challenges as a country, and we have to get ready to them. Also, with this international cooperation, we know that it can be a tool for women empowerment. And if we offer an intersectoral vision and an active participation of the ones who have been left behind in the past, focusing on the girls and the young women in our indigenous communities from the Palenquera tribes. And it is important to move forward in this topic. The Global Index of Responsibility of Artificial Intelligence Responsible locates us in a 14.84 points. So it means that we truly need these measures in order to move forward in this gender equality, not only achieving the inclusion of women, but also higher levels of scientific quality, of social justice and technological justice and sustainability. We know that the social transformation and the engagement of women in science and technology happens in high level, but also with our work in the institutions, in the schools. This is why the ministry has started the program ONDA that has been fundamental to boost the scientific professions between girls. From 2020 to 2024, more than 79,000 girls and teenagers participated, and this allowed to boost the interest towards science in girls and in teenagers, and also in higher education through the program Young Researchers that gives support to 600 women, 57% of which were women, and also focusing on the rural regions where we can see women who are descendants from African relatives, African descent, and where the armed conflict of Colombia has had very negative impact. And with this gender approach, we've been leveraging intersectoral models, giving a priority to these women in the vulnerable groups, so that they are established as a priority, and the different programs organized by the ministry, they are a priority, and also an active participation in the evaluation and assessment projects. And in this sense, we've been trying to establish this international dialogue in order to keep on boosting the scientific professions, especially between girls. A good example was these missions that we've been leading from the ministry. For example, the Mid-Harvard mission with researchers of the ONDAS program, where 12 girls and professors had an immersion in some laboratories in the United States. This is something key because it reinforces the capabilities of girls that can get closer to a different scientific project and technological projects, and these can transform their aspirations and also give visibility of the potential of women and different types of leadership in the region. And in the last 2 years, 56% of the beneficiaries of our programs, the ministry has developed different types of mechanisms, of funding mechanisms, and that try to give an answer to the challenges of the country, focusing on what we call the politics of research that is focusing on dealing with the right to food, healthcare sovereignty, and everything related to this awareness towards peace, which is also an important challenge in the country, and also the threats related to this energy transition. And a large amount of women have been in these science and technological ecosystems through this project, with these different contests that want to do that to fund these projects. And let me conclude by saying that we invite you to keep on working together and to recognize the role of women in science, not as an exception or quotas, but a necessary condition, a must for the development of our societies. And the government of Colombia, the ministry, is fully committed with the effective participation of women, equal participation, transforming participation. And this webinar is a great, valuable opportunity to make this commitment visible with other regions, and also to establish links and collaborations and dialogues that will allow us to reinforce the scientific diplomacy. So thank you very much, and we will be looking forward to meeting you all in November for this third interregional dialogue about education and development in Latin America, Africa, Europe, and Caribbean. Thank you.
Doctora Ángela, muchísimas gracias a usted. Muchas gracias.
Dr. Angela, thank you so much. Thank you for reminding us not only the challenges, but also the advances with some of the programs you have implemented and the targets you have set yourself. I would also like to thank you for your leadership to make this third interregional dialogue possible here in Colombia, which is a great opportunity for the region. So thank you to the ministry. It's been hard work, and we still have some months ahead to receive your other members. Now we have Carolina Santa Cruz Perez. She's Senior Scientific Officer of the International Science Council. Thank you, Carolina, for joining us today. Your role is to talk about this, to establish this dialogue, moderate this dialogue with our guests from different regions of the planet. that will allow us to talk about this topic, and this topic will be present in the third dialogue we will hold in Colombia with a cross-sectional topic, as a cross-sectional topic in our debate. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you very much, Juan Guillermo. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be. Oh, sorry, I am hearing myself. Let me just mute the translation. And again, thank you very much for. Okay, now it is on. So I'm very glad to be moderating this powerful dialogue preparatory for the meeting that we will have in Bogota this year. Actually, I will take advantage of this moment to celebrate that in November we will also have the presence of the Organization of Women in Science for the Developing World and the celebration of the General Assembly, representing OWS's most important institutional event held every 5 years and brings together women scientists, policymakers, research leaders, and institutional partners from all regions from the Global South. This 2025 assembly in Bogota will be hosted by the EAN University in close collaboration with the OWSD Colombia National Chapter and the Colombian Academy of Exact, Physical, and Natural Sciences. So we are very pleased to share that this event has been organized in partnership with the Interregional Dialogue and Cooperation and Development, co-led by overall in the African Union Commission and the government of Colombia. I think we see this alignment as a powerful opportunity to amplify women's voices and promote inclusive scientific development across regions. So I'm gonna give the floor to our spectacular panelists. I would like to introduce the presence of two very important guests that will represent the voices of the Global North and the Global South, and speaking about the superpower that women have and is knowledge. So we have with us Dr. Jackie Cado. She is Executive Director of the Network of African Science Academies, NASDAQ, from Kenya. And we also have with us dear Dr. Magdalena Sakdak from the UN GCNP Climate Council member, and she's also former director of the Polish Academy of Science from Poland. I would like to start saying that as we move into the discussion segment of today's webinar, we invite our speakers and participants to reflect not only in the challenges, but also on the opportunities for transformative collaboration across regions. This conversation is more than an exchange of experiences. It is a preparatory step toward the interregional dialogue between Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean that will take place in November, as we just said. And please let us consider how our regions can learn from one another, co-develop practical solutions, and shape a shared agenda to elevate the role of women in science as a driver of equitable development. So as we move forward to the questions we have prepared for our speakers, I would like to start addressing like to start with Dr. Cado. Please, if you can share with us what are the shared obstacles limiting women's full participation in science across regions, and how can interregional collaboration help dismantle them? So we hear you, Dr. Cado. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolina, and thank you so much, the organizer of the event, Obrial, and also all protocols observed, acknowledge IDRC, and also the minister from Colombia. Now, as you've heard, my name is Jackie Cado. I'll just share my ideas based on my work at the Network of African Science Academies. So I have an African bias in my interjections, but from my scope of work, I think the main things that we've seen shared in terms of barriers for women, getting them to fully participate in science, are usually two in nature. One is either institutional barriers, or two is cultural barriers. So let me explain those two. The institutional barriers come about because there's a way that institutions are organized, either in how they are set up or their mandate or the leadership, existing leadership that is there. Now, this would necessitate a way of doing things that is not instinctively to get less women participating in the various roles, but it is systemic because, for instance, in a situation where board leaders or council members are all men, there's a tendency to have a very unconscious bias to nominate fellow men into those leadership positions. It is not intentional, but it just happens because it's an innate bias that comes with the territory. So this ends up, in terms of institutions, giving limited access for leadership roles for women. And I think maybe because of the way women are socialized, they like being invited into position and not to go into cutthroat competition with other applicants. So that also deters the number of applications that we've seen women bring on board when, for instance, we have an election for academies for board members or to serve as chair of different working groups or committees that we set up. The other thing is sometimes you find a situation where there's gender insensitive workplace. This is still an institutional barrier because when you have a situation where, for instance, promotions are only given to those who have the highest number of publications, but then every scientist knows that to be able to develop publications in journals that are reputable, it needs time. That will not take into account that probably for a women scientist, they had to take time off work for either maternal leave or issues that are related to their gender roles, which means if you put a caveat that you're only taking leadership positions or promotions from people who have the highest publications, chances are high that the women scientists would have less publications. And therefore, it's a systemic way that innately gets the women participating less in institutional leadership. But then also there's the funding disparities. I don't know if it is the nature of aggressiveness that there are more women in economic sectors or leading philanthropic organizations, or even organizations that help fund academia. So for that reason, then you find many women have less opportunities to further their studies or do more research. And therefore, that is something that we've had to grapple with, even as a network, to find ways of getting funding that encourage more women participation and more women in academia. Then a little bit about cultural barriers. The social norms for which most African women, for instance, are raised up is that there are gender expectations that you will be able to be the caregiver. And it is not necessarily assumed that the men would take up that role very well. But then it's also the fact that because growing up, most girls view science as a male and tough subject, and therefore you have less and less girls taking on STEM education at the entry level. It therefore means that when we're looking up the academic ladder, you already have fewer women to begin with, which means when you find women who have excelled in their career, then we tend to overutilize them. And therefore, they will not have enough time to mentor more girls to enter into the system in the first place. So those are the main barriers. What can we do to ensure that there's some interregional collaboration, which is the second part of that question? One, I think if we create a joint mentorship network for women scientists, because for the network of African scientists, we do have a Women for Science working group, and they try and oversee first that NASAC itself leads by example and gets women into those leadership roles, but then also to connect with other regional organizations that have gender committees. And I think we've worked before, for instance, with IANAS, which is the equivalent of NASAC in the Americas, to be able to have a joint program and have a mentorship that you can jointly work with together. The second thing where we could collaborate easily with Latin America, for instance, would be to facilitate a policy exchange that could replicate the proven gender-inclusive frameworks that we've seen happening in the Americas. That has been easy to track because we can see that they have a system that works. So if we are able to facilitate those policy exchanges and just know what frameworks to employ within Africa so that we can see that leap of improvement, that would be good. But then last, and this would be my last comment also to the topic, is that if we support South-South research initiatives that are able to spotlight or highlight or even make more acknowledgement that there are more women-led innovation in the South, that would be helpful. Spotlighting means that we recognize, even as an institution, the contribution that women bring to the table when it comes to speaking science that is leading us to the front of overcoming quite a bit of our social challenges. So those three ways, then we'll be able to collaborate and see ways that even Africa leapfrogs into getting more women involved in STEM and in science in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kada, for bringing the attention to the challenges, the shared challenges in the global South and in relation and regarding institutional and cultural barriers. And because of that, I'm very looking forward to hearing if we are also sharing the same challenges at cultural and institutional level in the global South. So please, Dr. Setak, we hear you. The floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. It's a great privilege to be here, and I'm very happy to take part in this webinar on women in science and development because it's a hugely important topic around the world. I think it refers to all the continents. Before I go to the answer, I would like to say thank you to all the organizers because, as I've just mentioned, it's an important initiative, and I'm very happy to have this invitation and have the chance to speak. Referring to what Miss Dr. Kado just said, I will have to say that I was listening carefully, and I don't have much to add up to that because I feel that the challenges are very similar. Although I'm representing, let's say, Europe, but Europe has a different level of development between countries. And I come from Poland, which is the Central, Eastern, and European, Central and Eastern Europe. I feel that the problems and the challenges are still here, and I would start by the cultural barriers. And here I fully agree with Dr. Kado that it's really the gender stereotypes that lead us to two problems. First, the stereotype that the STEM domains, which is the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines, are more male disciplines. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that exactly, women have these social, regarding to the social norms that are still present frequently, is that these social norms position women mostly as the caregivers, not only of the children, but also of the elderly. And this, as Ms. Dr. Kado said, leads to the interruption of their scientific career frequently. And here they miss two things. First, they miss the, let's say, institutional support during the maternity leave, but also later the incorporation back to the institution and to continue their progress with their work. Often they're left out, let's say, of the topic already. So this leads us to the conclusion, again, the similar one to Dr. Kado, that women in the end are underrepresented in the leadership roles and in the STEM disciplines. Now, what can we do with that, or what has been already done with that? And here I would like to give you a couple of examples that come from Europe, which are actually quite positive. And I will start by the European Commission, by the fact that the European Commission adopted a roadmap for women's rights now in March in 2025. So this outlines the long-term strategy and vision for achieving gender equality in Europe. Second, we have a EU gender equality strategy with the key objective to close the gender pay gap, to close the gap of women in particular economy sectors, and obviously of the participation of women in decision making. That means on boards. The positive side that I hope I will have a chance to develop later is lately a so-called directive of women on boards. And this is an initiative that provokes that by mid-2026, the members or the members of the European Union will have to reach 40% of women in the non-executive boards. And in all the boards, that means non-executive and executive, they will need to have at least 33% of women. Which is extremely important because, just as Dr. Cado said, women don't arrive frequently to the decision-making positions. And that's extremely important to have their perspective and include their challenges in all the later process of making of the things. Referring to still on the equality and the gender equality, there's a framework that is the diversity, equality, and inclusion framework, which is not only in Europe. And there we have also the ESG, so that's the environmental, social, and governance, let's say, priorities, which by now in all the let's say companies that are big companies mostly verify in their reports if they really include women in the marketplace. And that's, I think, a way that is important, because if we have policy, then we actually have frequently the implementation. If we don't have policy, then we don't have implementation. And regarding the STEM fields, here I would like to give also a positive example. The EU has launched a Women Tech EU. It's called Women Tech EU. It's a work program in the Horizon Europe. It's launched by the European Innovation Ecosystem, and this supports the deep tech startups funded by women. So the deep tech startups funded by women are not only to create a more gender balanced entrepreneurship ecosystem in Europe, but also to support women who frequently go out of research and they want to make, let's say, business out of the research results. So this is very important to incorporate them also in the business sectors. So I could probably go on with some more examples, but I think these are the main ones, and I'm happy to elaborate if we will have more time on other programs that incorporate women more in both STEM and in the, let's say, in the leading positions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sachtak. I think after hearing you both, we can realize that if all of those changes and initiatives are happening, and women will represent half of the population of the world, that means the world is changing. And if we are changing, I think it is important to start addressing a matter that is being discussed in within parliamentarians as well, parliaments of the world, and is the unpaid care work and invisible burden. So I would like to ask you both, how can regional policies or initiatives be adapted or scaled through the region's cooperation or interregional cooperation to address the disproportionate impact of care responsibilities on women scientists? You started developing this subject at the beginning, Dr. Cado, but we would like to stand on the analysis of how the work of women at home could be considered as possibly remunerated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Carolina. So I think it starts at the beginning by acknowledging that the caregiving role is actually an additional role besides the professional work. So that acknowledgement is important, because most organizations do not, and therefore do not offer the necessary support that is required for women who are also tasked with having a caregiving role. So in specific answer or specific response to the question is, what can we do collaboratively to be able to see that this caregiving work is addressed through policy and specifically in adaptation? And I think Magdalena said that the South-South discussion has to take into account that there are differentiating factors. So 3 things in terms of developing a collaborative pathway is one, and I think I like what Magdalena has done, is to show us examples of where some of these gender issues have been addressed successfully. So the first thing I would recommend is, as one of the pathways, is to have this shared, the positive, successful stories that have happened in terms of recognizing that caregiving is actually a dual role that is carried by women at the workplace. And those policies you will see, and I think Magdalena will also agree with me, that they're able to offer flexible work time, to offer parental leave, to ensure, and I think she ended by saying, talking about the Women Tech program that the EU has adopted, is to ensure that there's actually funding that is geared towards giving grants to women that are involved in tech. Those little but very significant stories help the learning that happens between the regions, but it also gives that glimmer of hope that caregiving can also be put within organizational structure and be addressed as it should. The second thing is to be able to co-develop institutional guidelines that integrate care equity into the science systems. The co-developing is key, because if, even as leaders of institutions, develop that in a top-down manner, then adopting and implementing it will be hard. So the co-development has to happen at institutional level, where women themselves are invited to be able to speak into what those guidelines should say. But it also means that in areas where success has happened, the development should not start, the development of those guidelines should not start with the premise, because it worked in Europe or it worked somewhere else, it will automatically work in Africa, because there are some cultural differences or institutional nuances that have to be taken into account. So for instance, let me just give an example off my head. If you're addressing a culture whose norm is more narrative or oral, the stories and institutional memory is passed down from one leader to the next through an oral discussion, then having a written guideline would not help as much as translating the written guideline into an oral communication framework that they're able to adopt and pass from one person to the next. It is not ideal, but when you get a community that does not read and write, and we want to change the way they view science or view the role of gender, then those cultures have to be taken into account in developing those guidelines. So co-developing would be critical. And then lastly is just to encourage gender responsive budgeting in the science funding schemes. Because if you do not do that, then we are perpetuating the misnomer when it comes to the gender that accesses the funding system in the first place. So just having that gender responsiveness. So for instance, and I can give an example of what we're doing when we were giving grants for scientific research, and there was a caveat for age limit, especially when you look at what defines youth, is to be able to prolong that a little bit for women scientists because of the time taken off their academic career to be able to fulfill their other social roles. I want to stop there and give Magdalena a chance to also say something. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kada. So important, this subject, and I think from a broader development perspective, we see that women's participation in science and the economy is a critical driver of social transformation and economic growth. And studies have estimated that closing gender gaps in economic participation could add up to $28 trillion to global GDP by 2025. So I would like to hear from Dr. Satak. Do you think it is doable?
Yes, again agree very much with Dr. Cado, because even if we have different stages of development in different countries and in different continents, I think the problems still exist. They are the same problems, just in some cases we have already developed political, let's say, agreements and policy solutions for it. And here I think it's very important to build on top of the good examples and the practices that are working. And again, I would like to mention actually two very strong examples that as a women researcher, I did not use for myself, but I have seen many women encouraged by these solutions. And one is within the Horizon Europe, Maria Skłodowska-Curie action. It's just one of many examples. In this program, they have introduced a long-term leave allowance. So this provides, let's say, financial support during the maternity or paternity leave. So for women, the maternity leave. But touching upon that, there's not only this flexibility that the woman can, let's say, prolong the research grant, have a pause within the research grant, but she can also be supported during that time. Another thing is within the EU funding, frequently we have family allowances. That means that if it's if a woman already has a family, or if a man already has a family, and they decide to go and take a grant and a research position in elsewhere, they can also support, let's say, financially the partner, and that provokes that frequently, if it's the woman following the man, she's not left out of work. She also has support, and she can be, let's say, investing that in mentorship, training, and other needs. And the second good example is that right now, within, for example, Polish funding ecosystems, we have these solutions. I'm sure they're in more countries as well. We have this solution that frequently the framework for the funding indicates that, let's say, a woman, everybody can, let's say, apply for a postdoctoral position or a grant 10 years after a PhD or 5 years after a PhD. And since a couple of years, they have included the information that if you had a maternity leave within those years after the PhD, for women, this time is prolonged. So it's no longer 5 or 10 years, it's 6 or 11 years. So let's say the women during the time they were left out of, let's say, their working years, they are not penalized, because frequently that has provoked also different family decisions for many, because they decided, okay, all the grants are up to 5 years after a PhD. So after a PhD, I just have to invest in science. I cannot make a family. Well, now, no. Now you can also have a family. And then if you're a woman, it's going to be 5 years plus all the time that you've been on the maternity leave. So I think these solutions are very useful. They're very practical, and I'm sure we can have more solutions, but this is a good start. And a second example that I would like to also give, and I very much agree with Dr. Cado, that it's all the flexibility of the workplace, and that has to be done also through public policy and, let's say, institutional support. And I think what the pandemic has helped us with was actually developing working, let's say, from homes, and flexible work time, and, let's say, lack of presence at the institution can also be a helpful solution for women. So we have done lately a study in Poland, and it was for all women which are in, let's say, senior leading positions. And the results of this study showed clearly that women are asking for a more flexible workplace, because since there is this stereotype and everybody expects them to be the caregivers, they need a more flexible, let's say, work framework and time framework. And second thing that they expect turned out in this study is that they really need the institutional and public support with accessible and affordable, let's say, childcare. So let's say kindergartens or institutions which support the family or the mother to actually go back to work. And the last thing I would like to mention, because of the time frame, is actually, I think this is a very good example also from my country. I know it's not in all Europe, but that's also a good example from a country where, let's say, Central and Eastern Europe also has very strong stereotypes. And we have, in public policy, we have managed to obtain that the maternity leave can be also given to the men, and that's the paternity leave or father leave, and it can be it can be shared equally between the two, or the men can decide to take the so-called maternity leave. That means the woman stays at work and the man takes care of the children. And that's a solution that more and more families are deciding on. So that means that it will take time, but the society is changing, and men are also, the more they are included, the more they are happy to participate. And obviously, there are places where this will be extremely strong, but I think it's good to, as Dr. Kado said, draw on the good examples and do the storytelling and show that this is possible. And then we're all going to have a better, let's say, and less interrupted careers for women in science. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarkak. I think we are feeling the power of this webinar in terms of so many suggestions regarding policy that you both have raised, and I think that is very valuable. We need to recognize that so many initiatives have been launched and a lot of efforts have been made through years. But we also need to recognize that even though those efforts are being made, we still see that is not enough. And I think we should rely on thinking if those leadership examples that are isolated could be potentialized if we move forward with them at interregional level. So I would like to ask you both, what successful examples of leadership, mentorship, or institutional transformation have emerged that could inspire joint strategies so we can increase the potency? We hear you, whoever you will like to start.
Okay, I think I've gotten used to starting, so I'll just start and then give Magdalena a chance. So I think I'll just make examples. I mean, I said at the beginning that some of these systemic issues can be resolved if the organizations themselves lead from the front. So a simple example I can show you, for a very long time, and I can tell you NASAC was set up in 2001. We never had a board that had women scientists at the top level of leadership. But then 3 years ago, something drastic happened. The moment we set up a Women for Science committee as not ad hoc, but as a standing committee of NASAC, you will not believe it, but now we have more women on the board than we do have men. And then, so in a board of 7, imagine 4 of them happens to be women. And that's really a milestone in terms of the organizational step. And that has only happened since the 3 years. But then it means that if NASAC itself can embrace women leadership at the top, at the board level of the organization, the members themselves now have to institute programs or activities that will ensure that the women scientists get a role at the top, even if it's not leading as a committee, but even at the council level for most of those. So an example would be when within those 3 years, we're able to report that out of our 32 science academies, we've seen at least 3, unfortunately, not so big, but 3 science academies elect female scientists at the leadership level to be level of president. Now that for us was phenomenal because it hasn't happened before. But the thing is this, to permanently echo that gender issues are not women issues. It is an issue that both genders have to address. So even when I'm celebrating having more women on my board, it is clear that the ideal would to have representation of both genders on the same board. So we do that by co-opting or adding other, getting specific advice on specific topics and co-opting additional members. So that's the example I would give that has worked for Africa from my organizational perspective. But then just leaning from what Magdalena mentioned, I think from the LAC region, what we've seen is a good system of gender audits, institutional quotas, and I think she spoke about having those quotas being fulfilled. For us, we would have the quotas, but it would take another activity to get those quotas implemented. But then last and not least is the fact that they have gender parity laws, something that we're yet to have within our own framework in Africa. And then I conclude by giving what would be our joint actions now that we know what we know, and from those examples, is one, just to have a combined leadership and mentorship schemes that would promote the participation of more women in leadership, because you don't notice until the awareness is created around that as an issue that we need to tackle. Secondly, we need to adopt tools that would monitor and have accountability frameworks instilled in them. Because if you only have tools that would monitor whether there's gender equity or gender equality, but you do not have a framework to put the leaders accountable, then it is as good as not doing much. So just adding the monitoring bit into these are the frameworks or these are the goals we are leading up to. And then lastly is just to have the reform effort, the institutional reform efforts that we see, even when I'm using science academies as example, is to have gender equity embedded into their own systems and structures. Because if you do that, then permanently, when we are deploying committee members, when we are nominating officials to lead the organization, then there's a consciousness that puts gender at the fore that we need to instill at the onset, so that even the systems themselves would automatically have a gender lens when looking at those reform efforts or institutional reforms that we want to institute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kader. We hear you, Dr. Sakdar.
Well, again, here I agree, and I would like to give a couple of examples. I think that the leadership is something that women frequently do intuitively, but I think it's very important to also have a professional background for that. And here is what I mean. I think it's extremely important, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to send women and girls to business schools. So they have a background in economy, in strategy, in innovation, in cultural organization. So they have this professional background that can later help them execute also this work. And I think today there are more and more leadership programs dedicated for women. And I would like to give one example, one concrete example, that the European Innovation Council, in partnership with the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, has a women leadership program. It's called as easy as that. And this is dedicated for both women entrepreneurs and women researchers. And in the women researchers cohort, they finance not only, let's say, the support of the woman to give her research initiatives, let's say, a way to go to business, but also mentoring, business coaching, and networking. And I really think mentoring, business coaching, and networking are very important elements which frequently were previously, let's say, not so frequently offered to women, especially the business coaching. And I think this is already a very good example. There is also this awareness. So let's say professional education, but also awareness. And awareness, I would like to refer again to this Women on Boards initiative that I actually learned about on the occasion of the Women's Day this year, because there is this international initiative called Ring the Bell for Gender Equality. And nota bene, it's organized by the stock exchanges. So the place for business and for money. And the stock exchanges, this year in cooperation with the United Nations Global Compact Network, Poland, for example, in Poland have organized this and promoted this Women on Boards directive. And this is not only spreading the awareness, but also preparing, let's say, the community that this is in front of us, that women have this possibility. Now we are opening, let's say, postgraduate studies for women who want to go on these boards, because that requires probably also some additional education in terms of management of boards or economic aspects. So that is very important to have both the awareness and the professional preparation. And I think also one last thing that is extremely important to mention, the examples that we have that are always very inspiring. And as I'm from Poland, I cannot not mention Maria Skłodowska-Curie, which in 1903, we are in 2025, and in 1903, she got her first Nobel Prize as the first woman to get a Nobel Prize, the first woman to get 2 Nobel Prizes, and the only person to get 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different disciplines of science. And that was 1903 and 1911. So that was a century ago. That means women have potential for STEM. Women can reach the top even if there is, let's say, if they need persistence, let's call it that way. If they need persistence, they can do it abroad in another country. But I think today maybe we can just simply create the ecosystem that supports these women and that they don't have to fight so much for it. So this is why the good policy and the awareness and the leadership academies can really, and programs and scholarships for women can give them an easier start, and that's very important.
I do deeply appreciate what you have said during this dialogue. It has been a very powerful and inspiring dialogue between Dr. Cado and Dr. Sagdak. We are arriving to the last part of the webinar, and I would like to invite Dr. Fernando Perini to contribute from the voice of the Latin American region and at interregional level. We'd like to ask you three to please go towards the shared agenda and share with us concrete recommendations should emerge from this webinar to inform the interregional agenda on gender equity and science and innovation systems. So thank you very much for this enjoyable time, and we hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolina, for the very, very engaging conversation. And thank you for all the comments also in the chat. There are so many interesting points there. I would love to have more time to dig deep on some of them, actually. And hopefully you're going to have more time as well to address those in November. I would just start to say that it was super rich, and I'm not going to try to summarize all the rich stuff and the recommendations that are going on, but maybe just point to a few things that I think is just point to a few things that I heard again and again during the conversation that I think are super important. First, while there is some progress, there is also overall, and we see that, for instance, in the case of Colombia, where we see the milestone where there's more women in general in science, the needle is moving. There's also a need to be more specific, more targeted on the inequalities that exist. So we need to be much more understanding those challenges and addressing them. So the issues like on AI or having a clear roadmap for action, right? As it's developed in Colombia, as in Europe, and so on. We need more of this, no? The clear planning and roadmaps on how can it tackle these more challenging, thorny issues that we haven't addressed so far. So I think that there are many ideas there. Just to point to a few, the issue of scholarships for underrepresented women and STEM are obviously very important. How can we work? I love the question from the point from Fahad, I think is her name, mentioning in war-torn countries, how can we support them internationally, right? Really get these fellowships to women that are not in places where they would normally get those fellowships. So, and not just that, but of course, many different women are in underrepresented underrepresented in many fields, but also they have it not in positions that they can get funding. So think about the mentorship and scholarship funding for those women that are excluded by other intersectional challenges like race or social class, geography, etc. So I think that's super important. The issue of gender audit and more importantly, reforms in terms of the policies of the institutions. Maybe one thing that we didn't touch that much, but is also very important is sexual harassment. Harassment in different places is still very preponderant, and I think we need to tackle that in many places of the world. This is an unsolved issue, and we need to tackle that and have clear policies to address those. And I think that's also addressed some of the comments that you see on the chat. We need to think about the curriculum revision changes, faculty training in the universities, so that basically we have methodologies that address kind of people have the capacity to address some of the entrenched challenges in the way they teach that sometimes really limit the participation of women. I think we need to kind of be bolder on national media campaigns as well, on putting the woman in leading science, as Madalena said, in case of the Nobel Prizes that we have from women. We just need to break those stereotypes further, right? It's not just one fellowship at a time, but also support those women that are leading in science to break all the stereotypes that we see are still there, especially in specific fields. I would emphasize also the issue that was mentioned in terms of research and data-driven approaches, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all and everything can be copied and pasted from one place to the other. We need research, we need data, we need to understand what's specific to that specific context so that we can address the specific needs there. And finally, of course, we need multi-stakeholder alliances. We need to work together in different levels to address this, and across regions, leverage some of the leaders in this field, but also bringing together all of us, right, to address some of these challenges. It will not solve that alone. We need to work together to move the agenda forward. So I stop there and hand it over back to you, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perini. We now are ready to hear recommendations from Dr. Karen, Dr. Sakat, and this pool of recommendations I think can generate a publication. So we might think about writing the proceedings of this very productive dialogue.
Thank you. So I'll be very brief, I think, and thank you so much, Fernando, for highlighting that summary, because it also triggered my mind in highlighting the fact that from the NASAC side, we have a Women for Science working group that is working on the role of women using science diplomacy in times of a crisis. And that's where you actually see the people who bear the brunt are actually the women and mostly children, but yeah. So that would be a publication I'd be happy to circulate once we are done, because it's something we are doing through November of this year. But let me just speak on 3 things then that I think I can summarize that came out of our discussion. And I think I really loved the examples and the positive examples that Magdalena gave. One, I think it is important that the two regions, the LAC and Africa, to establish a bi-regional gender observatory. Remember, it can look good on paper, but if nobody is refereeing, if nobody is tracking, if nobody is monitoring, then it will not happen. So that bi-regional gender observatory will give the impetus for us to be able to track, are we really doing what we say we would do in respect to gender? It will give us the data that we need to be able to form evidence-informed decision when we are advising policy. It will enable us to benchmark whether we are getting to where we need to be in terms of the goals we've set. The second thing, and I think Fernando spoke to it, is to have a gender transformative funding system. It has to be a scheme that is different from your typical funding criteria, where women-led research is prioritized, but then even in the funding decisions, gender criteria is added so that we're able to track and ensure that the funding scheme that is offered is actually transformative. And then lastly, and I think I liked when Magdalena was saying, there's a difference between increasing awareness and having the professional certification that you need. But for that to be implemented, for me, I think if we create a bi-regional knowledge exchange platform so that we're able to facilitate peer learning, to know what good success stories exist out there that we are able to emulate, not just copy and paste, but to draw our lessons from, but to also have an institutional reform that would be able to allocate policy tools, leadership models that we can benefit from learning from each other. So that knowledge exchange platform, it doesn't need to be a physical place. It can be an online reference point that when we are looking at gender issues, we have areas where we can have peer learning from. Thank you.
Last but not least, I hope. Well, a lot has been said. I will just emphasize on a couple more things, which I've mentioned before, but I think it's important to emphasize from the observations I have made so far. Good intentions and let's say good examples are extremely important, but unless it's not put into the policy, it is hard to execute it. So I always say, if we want to really have what we're talking about, it has to be implemented in policy. And that's the example for even, in Europe, the Women on Boards Directive, it obliges 40% by mid-2026 of non-executive female board members. And that's an example where we have a percentage and we have a time frame. So it has to be exact, let's say, and it has to be implemented. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I think it's important to share what we have already developed, because some things work, some things didn't work. So based on the experience we have, I think it's not necessary to reinvent the wheel, but take the good practices and adapt them elsewhere. And the good practices, I think there's a lot of good practices within, for example, the framework or Horizon Europe, which is the biggest framework for funding research in Europe. We have a lot of information there that requires gender equality in research teams. So if we have a project, that we have to have gender equality within the team, that we have all these, let's say, maternity leave allowances, that we have, let's say, the amount of funding, exact amount of funding or projects that have to be directed to women in tech. Or to support STEM scholarships. So I think there's already a lot of material that has proved to be useful, and it's good to work on top of that. And the last thing I would like to mention is that I really think it starts from the childhood and in the early stage education. And this is why I think it's extremely important to promote at that stage already, not later. The fact that girls can go to STEM disciplines, That's first thing, that they can go up to research and become, let's say, the principal investigators and grants, and they can develop this type of career, that research is a career, science is a career. They can become scientists. That's important from the early stage. And I think an important role that doesn't always exist, or at least it didn't exist in my childhood, is that there's mentoring and coaching in planning the career. So if girls receive the coaching and already at, let's say, high school, planning the career, they understand what is available, what career paths they can take, and that one of them is science. And if they go to science, it can be a job where they receive also money, where they can also, let's say, co-create the future and innovation. And from there, starting already from science, I always say science goes with development and innovation. And that's already a part to start introducing girls, that not only science, but also innovation. That means they can really go to create startups out of their research. They can be female funders of startups, and that also is starting right now to be pushed in the EU funding schemes. So I think these three things are quite important. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, you all, for your precious recommendations. I see that we are in the pathway of increasing the 33% of representation of women in science, and I would like to see more discussions looking into the future. Now, if we get to increase that percentage, then in which areas are women going to focus to prepare which kind of world for 2050? So let's see what is the vision of women when they get in science, in power, in leadership. And before saying goodbye, there's several comments on the chat. Thank you very much to our audience for appreciating this dialogue and celebrating that this is the first preparatory activity that we are having towards the interregional dialogue that is going to happen in Bogota in November. So this is a small sample of how amazing women's and powerful discussions are going to be held during this period. And I will like to come back to a question that was addressed by Fernando, but I would like to hear your opinions, Dr. Caro and Dr. Sakak, regarding this. Today's discussion is inspiring, but I wonder, how can we ensure that talented women in want or underfunded regions are not left behind in global science? Will it be possible to create global satellite hubs or partnerships to support these women in mentorship, tools, and visibility? I would like to hear your thoughts on this, especially from those working in international policy and education.
Well, the straight answer there is yes. It's possible to have the hubs be able to promote more women pursuing STEM. And I think maybe we've reached a point where the world is actually reachable. I mean, even for the underprivileged, it is possible to access what's happening globally very easily. I think the term now is a global village, which is what we used to refer. It is possible to be in Kenya and actually be employed in another organization, another region completely different. Because, and I think that is something that COVID taught us, that you're able to do online work much more appropriately than we would ever give it the credence that it needed to be given. But the thing is this, that even if you're living in an underprivileged environment, thinking and having the awareness that it is possible to do better above and beyond what your circumstances are starts by, I think, what Magdalena was saying, the education, and it starts early. When you get educated earlier that there are more opportunities for women beyond just the caregiving roles that society expects, then you're able to open their minds to pursue even those careers outside their setup, so that they're able to benefit the society more. But lastly, is also to ensure that the academic grants empower not just the individuals who were campaigning here to be more female scientists, but to also capacitate the institutions in the region locally. So, for instance, if I am in Kenya, I should have a well-capacitated university locally, and that can draw on international funding, foreign investment, or hubs that get you economic startups so that you're able to equip the institutions in addition to equipping the individuals. And that way, then you're able to have a circulation of capacities that goes beyond the borders and the territories that we assign individuals and scientists that we know in Africa, for instance. Thank you.
I don't know if Fernanda wants to speak before me. Yes, please. Okay.
I can do that. Just one idea there. I know that we work, for instance, and I know Carolina, you mentioned at the beginning the organization for Women in Science and Developing World, but just because there has been efforts in the past to provide fellowships to women, and they are very limited. They're not many. They're limited support. What we have been seeing the last while is actually a grow on the chapters that will meet also together with these chapters will meet in Colombia as well. This has been a way that women that received fellowships and that are now thriving in science are now trying to organize themselves in their different countries to, for instance, support other women that is starting in science and create a movement around it, right? And support these efforts. So I think it is not going to be the fellowships of international organizations that will solve the issue, but I do believe that the organization of people at the national and local level will continue to be more and more important. So can we support these women that are organizing and passing baton, all kind of creating, building the narrative, then working with national organizations to change things, create more fellowships, adjust institutions, and so on. I think that's a beautiful vision on how we can kind of scale up the process there, no, rather than international aid is under attack. There's limited funding to all the humanitarian crisis we have today. So kind of having the funding even for that humanitarian kind of in crisis in science, it's kind of getting harder and harder, right? So we do need to create kind of, while we need to fight for that too, we need also to work with national organizations, national partners, people that already received these scholarships, that have the experience to build a network, create the institutions moving forward. And I think that that could be a beautiful agenda for us to work further and create some concrete actions to move this forward from Bogota, using the presence of some of the chapters there and of course the interregional dialogue there, and people that are supporting fellowships at the national level as well to work on the stories and incorporate these practices into the fellowships that they have in their own national system. So it's a beautiful agenda moving forward.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And we would like to hear your opinion, Dr. Sadak.
Thank you. I think a lot has been said, and I agree with that. So I will try to take a slightly broader perspective. I took notes, and I would like to touch upon three things. The first thing is that actually what we want to avoid is to have brain drain. So once we highly educate and we invest in let's say women and men in other countries, and it's important to also maintain them in that country, because frequently the institutions, they invest the money, they educate, but then the best let's say scientists leave the country, and that's not good either. So here, touching upon what Dr. Cado said, I think it's important to support the infrastructure and the institutions within the countries to be sufficiently attractive or good to maintain the talent. So I would kind of go also this way to not only give scholarships and go abroad, but often, let's say Maria Skłodowska-Curie fellowships, they also say you go abroad for certain years, you study, but then you have to return back to your country and transfer the knowledge into your country. And that's very wise, because I think it's very important to transfer the knowledge into the countries and to maintain the talent. The second thing is regarding places with war. We have let's say the situation is as it is. We have the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, and we are in Poland. And the Polish Academy of Sciences has, in cooperation with many other academies of sciences, has launched a lot of scholarships for the Ukrainian refugees, including women. And they have received, let's say, positions in the research institutes, not only in Poland, but abroad also. So there's a lot of, let's say, mobilization of efforts, for example, of the Polish Academy of Sciences to really support scientists, regardless of gender, coming from countries with war. In this case, it's more for women, because men actually stay in that country and fight. And here I would also like to touch upon a very interesting aspect. I think it was one of I spoke about this at the International Science Council meeting, I think 2 years ago, exactly about science diplomacy in times of crisis. It's extremely important that when these scientists receive scholarships and leave the country, they maintain in the publications the two affiliations, one of their home institution and one of the guest institution. That means that the institutions back home, they still maintain the connection and they don't disappear from the global map of institutions because they have not been publishing for years. No, the affiliation is for two institutions, and that's, I think, very important. And to finish, I would like to touch upon a positive aspect also, and that would be that I think science diplomacy, science and technology diplomacy, that is becoming a more and more important topic, at least at the EU level, is that this is very much about sharing. So it's also about the knowledge transfer. It's also about using common infrastructure. So we build infrastructure. Let's say we use infrastructure made out of infrastructure in particular countries. But what's the positive aspect? I really think that every country has some potential. And depending on the field of science, I can speak about environmental sciences. There are countries which have, let's say, resources, natural resources that are, let's say, the samples. There are countries which have, let's say, we have the Arctic, where everybody wants to go and do research on icebergs or climate change. So every country has its own potential, and that's the science diplomacy. And today we are speaking also more and more about indigenous knowledge and incorporating the indigenous knowledge into the way we will be doing science. And I think that's a very positive thing for the future, that we need to understand that the knowledge is not only the modern type of making knowledge, but also the indigenous knowledge that is extremely valuable, and that every country has a potential, especially in the natural, in the sense of environmental potential or talent potential, that can be shared and used for the common good. So with this positive aspect, I think I would like to end. Thank you.
Well, I have no words to say thanks to our spectacular speakers. It has been a highly enriching dialogue, a small test of the huge thing that we will have here in Bogota in November. You are all invited to follow our activities. We will be very happy to share the recording of this powerful webinar to our audience, and let's keep in touch to continue this conversation at interregional level, that I think it has been so enriching, sharing good experiences, best practices, inspiring recommendations. It has been amazing, and I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of moderating this webinar. We will keep in touch with those who have sent questions. So we would like to share with you the contacts of our speakers if it is possible for you to address some of your questions. And please, let's stay in touch, because this is just the first of many good dialogues that we will have during 2025. Thank you so much again, and a big hug. Thank you, Dr. Sakta. Thank you, Dr. Cado. Thank you, Dr. Perini. Obrel, the regional focal point for the regional focal point for Latin America and the Caribbean of the International Science Council, the national government of Colombia, IDRC. Hope to see you soon.